So people of Sunday Papers Live, are you ready to meet your gardening editor? Would you please welcome up Abi Aspen Glencross? She's got a little bit of a tough route to navigate.
Hello. So I'm the gardening editor. I'm not sure how that happened. So I was actually going to gather leaves on the way and write my notes on them to be really eco. And then I've been working in an underground lab for about 2 months and then came back to London and had a bit of a great time for 2 days and now have borrowed my housemate's cereal box and written it on that instead. So my name's Abi Aspen and I'm kind of like a renegade scientist slash explorer slash part-time farmer. And I actually study chemical engineering at university. And I've worked in a kind of really bizarre, eclectic array of fields. So I was an oil and gas consultant for a while. I designed gas masks. And then for the last 2 years, for a very bizarre series of events, have ended up growing meat in the lab from stem cells. They say that guys think about sex every, I think it's 7 seconds. Well, if you replace that with meat, that pretty much sums up my life now. So I suppose I'm a biotechnologist, if I'm anything. But this has led me on one hell of a journey, something that I could never, ever have seen. So I actually co-founded a collective called Future Farm Lab. And we've just been on this incredible journey, which means that I now work on farms. I co-run my parents' organic allotment. And then I also run a project called Our Field, which is a grain co-op, which seems 40 people co-invest in a field of grain throughout the year and make decisions alongside the farmer. So these two lives might seem quite conflicting, right? But maybe that's just what we've been led to believe. Because Future Farm Lab is bridging the kind of farming, technology, agriculture divides in a way that we hope is going to protect the planet, create a nourishing ecosystem for everyone, and create community. Probably the main thing is creating community. So I'm going to talk to you about food, farming, technology, but maybe from a different perspective than you've ever heard before. And I really toyed with how to do this for ages. I was like, how do you take people on this journey? And then I thought, oh, you just actually take them on the journey that we've been on through our food system. Because this is a crazy, crazy system that we buy into and that we're part of every day as consumers, as taxpayers, and just as inhabitants of this planet. So we should probably start this journey where I started mine, which was in the Cornish countryside where I grew up. And I had a really lovely childhood, riding my horses through green pastures filled with animals, and it was all kind of super lovely. And then went to Bath University to study chemical engineering. And here I learned some really, really hard truths. That those animals that I was frolicking around with in the fields with, that sounds a little bit weird actually, those animals that I was with in the fields, they were the ones that we were eating in the evening, and the ones that were tightly packaged in plastic in the supermarkets. And all I could think was, shit, I'm eating Calvin the cow. Like, how did that happen? And the worst thing was that most of those sort of lovely animal lives that I'd been part of in my childhood, that wasn't how we were raising most of our animals or our plants. They're part of this industrialized system, the majority of them. You know, it's a system where we're pumping animals full of grain and keeping them indoors. It's a system where we're planting plants in monocultures, which is like the nerdy word for same plant altogether, and dousing them with chemicals. This agricultural system is producing more greenhouse gases than the whole of the transportation sector, one of the main contributors to antibiotic resistance, and it's just not producing good food anymore. And all I could think of was, how the heck did it end up like this? So, enter stage left, the ghost of farming past. So, once upon a time in a land not so far from here, or here, about 200 years ago, we lived in a time called pre-industrialization. And that was when pretty much everyone lived in rural areas, and the majority of our workforce worked in agriculture. And then about the late 1700s, we started to realize we could increase our agricultural output by doing certain things like rotating the crops and ploughing. So this kind of thing continued. We started to lose our workforce. And by the mid-1800s, only about 20% of us still worked in agriculture as people moved towards the cities and machine just sort of won out and replaced people. And then if you fast forward again to another sort of big agricultural revolution, actually the one previously was kind of cited as one of the causes of the Industrial Revolution. And the next, well, another really big one was post-World War II. And we stopped bombing each other, so we realized that the nitrogen in the bombs that we were making could be made into fertilizers, which then we could spread on the fields, and that crazily increased our crop production, like really loads. And this kind of coincided with different breeding programs and genetic modification, which was all of the Green Revolution era. And we had this massive output of things like wheat and barley in the UK, and we had seas of it and lakes of it, and we just didn't really know what to do with it. So we started to feed it to animals, which we'd never done before. So this was kind of great at the time. You had more animals, they got fatter quicker, people then can suddenly afford things like steak instead of, the offally bits that we didn't really want. So it seemed really, really good. And then this cracks started to appear, so we started to waste more and had to do something with that. Each year that we sprayed fertilizers on our fields, we had to spray more each year. It started to run off into our soils and into our water systems, and we began to rely on these companies which we bought the chemicals from in the start to begin with. And then we realized things like, these animals couldn't live that long on this diet. And all these problems sort of made it so that crops lost their worth and farmers started to specialize and agriculture became sort of centralized, losing our small-scale farmers, and it just kind of got a bit weird. Food got weirdly cheaper, but not in a real sense. But I actually talk about this as if it's in the past, but we got locked into this system and we still are there. And as a person who eats quite a lot of food, I never even realized this. And I didn't really know what to do with the information, so I just kept digging away like a nerdy scientist in my lab. And I kept going, and then I sort of got given this project, again, bizarre series of events, which was growing meat in the lab from stem cells. And I couldn't believe it. I was sort of sold on the idea from the start that we could totally de-incentivize this industrial model with this burger that was made in 2013. And this burger was dubbed one of the most innovative food technology innovations, I suppose, of our time. Something that could decrease greenhouse gas emissions and feed the world and save all the animals. And it was even in Vogue magazine, so I was sold from the word go. And so I kind of looked more into it, and I realized this burger wasn't solving all the problems, because whole cuts of meat are what drive the meat industry, not burgers. So, always the optimist, I thought, great, what's next? Steak. Steak's what's next. So I set out to find my own funding and supervisors and stuff like that, and then ended up a year later starting to grow steak in the lab from stem cells. And how you grow meat in the lab from stem cells is utterly fascinating. So you take a muscle biopsy from a cow, and you take out muscle stem cells, which lie in there. It's called quiescent, and they just kind of sit there and don't really do anything. So you take them out, and you initiate trauma. So it makes them multiply in this nutrient-rich broth. And then you put them into a collagen gel between two anchor points. And the anchor points we used were Velcro. Put them in this gel, and they form muscle fibers. And then they grab on to these anchor points, and they kind of twitch and form proper functional muscle fibers, which is pretty cool. And you put them all together, about 20,000 of them, and you can get a burger. And so, if anyone wants to see any pictures, I have a few of twitching muscle fibers. So you can have this burger. And so while I was doing this is really interesting, and I started to be exposed and kind of research other high technologies that they've been dubbed the saviors of the world. So whether it's cultured meat, or if it's GM or aquaponics, and I started to research them as well. And then you realise the media feeds us what it wants to feed us. And as you research and work on it every day, you realise the cracks really, really begin to form. So can we grow animals without killing any animals? Well, no. The answer is we can't. We feed the cells, as in all tissue engineering, for medical or food. We feed them this thing called fetal calf serum, which is essentially calf blood that's taken while they're still in the mother's stomachs. Stomachs? No, I don't think calves grow in stomach. I'm not a biologist. So taken from a heifer. So that's not so great, okay, but at least maybe we can grow them in bioreactors, not really needing the environment, or aquaponics we can grow underground and never have to worry about the soil. Again, no. We feed a nutrient-rich broth, which contains carbohydrates and proteins, and where do they come from? Well, corn and soy at the moment. So you're still growing things to feed your bioreactors to then feed you, or feed your meat and feed you. Same with aquaponics. With the fish, you hear all the, like fish feed. So you're growing plants or aquatic organisms, and then sometimes you're feeding fish to feed humans through feeding plants. It's like fish inception. And so I realized that that wasn't really solving the problem either. Oh, bugger. Okay, well, let's look to GM. What about GM? Highly controversial. Bit of a minefield. Are we creating drought-resistant crops by doing that? Because that was a really big thing. And then it's kind of not conclusive whether they're doing any better than breeding techniques that were before GM. And then there was a whole golden rice about producing rice with vitamin A in it, and that saved millions. But then it also made millions rely on chemical or whatever companies to grow their food instead of empowering them to do it themselves. So all of them a bit of a minefield, and essentially all of them still need the fundamentals of a healthy environment. So they are pieces of the current and future puzzle, but they're not really addressing the need for a healthy environment, and they're not rebuilding one at all. So I kind of came to the weird conclusion of like, how do we make the fundamentals of these technologies, all of them, so the sun, the soil, water, plants, how do we make them as sexy and desirable as a technology that I often get to speak about? And that was really, well, it's been really difficult. Because also, does technology have a role in our future food system? If so, what? And are all technologies utterly bamboozling like these and keep giving me really weird existential crises? So that's kind of where Future Farm Lab came in. We started as 3 nerdy scientists, all working in sort of high tech, but we don't take anything for a given, and we analyse the shit out of everything. So we started to explore, like properly explore. So from pesticides to permaculture, from agribusiness, some very weird meetings with agribusiness, to organics. And there we met something really cool. And we met this thing called agroecology, which is like the gorgeous, sexy mega babe of the food and farming world, which does exist. And the principles which agroecology is based on might just help us rebuild the food system. So agroecology essentially begins with plants. And plants are awesome. This is coming from an animal scientist. Plants are bloody amazing. They take carbon dioxide and water. Using the sun, they produce oxygen and glucose. So they soak up carbon dioxide, which we want to get rid of. Whoa, 5 minutes. They soak it up really quickly, and they produce oxygen, which we breathe, and essentially energy, which is pretty cool. And they also have these crazy symbiotic relationships with the soil and exchange nutrients and stuff like that. And then these things come along called animals, and they eat the plants and digest something that we can't, which is the cellulose cell wall. And then they die, or others eat them, and then they die, go back to the land, and then grow new plants. And you'll notice this circular economy, which is pretty cool, and that's what agroecology is based on, from field to fork. So in the field with the farmer, cycling of nutrients, rotating crops, getting cows and other animals to poop on your land to fertilise it. And for us, it means, eating in season, local, native plants, and that sort of thing, empowering communities. But the thing that really interested me was the fact that we could use technologies to empower this and make it sexy, or help make it sexy. I think soil is sexy anyway. So how do we do this? Well, you could do things like have a drone, community drone, map soil moisture content or weeds within a field, or an online platform which would aid community farming all over the world. or apps to create small data from relevant points in the field, which is pretty cool. And I know that I've outlined kind of the very ecological side of this, so the very lovely agroecological and the very high tech. And farming will lie, or does lie, on this iridescent spectrum between the two. But knowing that both existed really, really gave me hope. So this is kind of where my story ends, but also my story begins, because I fly away to America tomorrow to go and work on some food and farming centres. But I probably haven't got time to really explain it too much, but I was going to have everyone try and imagine what the future food system could look like, which would include growing meat in the lab and other things as well. So if I have time, do I have time to imagine? 3 minutes to imagine a future. We can do this. Everybody close their eyes and have a great time. Okay, so imagine a future about 100 years from now. You wake up in the morning, and it's a lovely sort of July, August, maybe morning. Sun's coming through the window. It's really nice. You head downstairs for breakfast, and on the side, it looks like a bread maker, but you go over, and it's actually a bioreactor, and you're growing heritage pork bacon. And in there, it's been going for about 4 weeks, and you sourced all the cells from a local farmer, and he doesn't keep many pigs anymore, just to till the land, and his cells are really worth something, which is pretty cool. And also, it's a real hassle buying old-fashioned meat now, because you have to buy the whole animal, and you're actually taxed on waste. So you eat your sandwich, head out to work, and you come out into your garden. And apparently, people used to mow their lawns. That's a really absurd thing. And then throw away the cuttings. Now it's just like an edible utopia, with all sorts of flowers and plants that you can eat and you share with your neighbours, which is pretty cool. So you head over to your bike on your way to work. It's actually unseasoned, well, not unseasonably now, but it's very warm because the seasons are more distinct now. So you take off your jumper, and this might be because we didn't only hit the 2-degree rise limit in the rise in 2020 Paris Agreement temperature thingamajigs. We actually decreased it to pre-industrial levels 1 degree. And you think that's because they banned all internal combustion engines from the year 2030. And now everyone cycles or uses hydrogen, which is kind of cool, cleaner air, and everything's lovely. So you get on your bike and cycle to work, and you cycle past Hyde Park. And I have a minute. You cycle really fast past Hyde Park. And actually, it doesn't look like a park anymore. It looks like a forest, because we've rewilded all the parks in central London. And you see some people pruning the bushes. And actually now we've followed suit to some places in Europe. And we have a 4-day week. And one of those days, there's schemes so that which actually does exist somewhere, schemes to get you out growing community food and just outdoors, and everyone's happier. Carry on to work, and you work in a restaurant, which is plant-based, and you farm on 3 layers. So you farm on the roof, you farm outside in your gardens, and actually underground using an aquaponics system. This is fed from energy that's solar panelled on your building, which is pretty cool. Very in-season, lovely menu. Go for your day at work, and then you come out at the end of the day and you go to the community field, which is going to take me 30 seconds. You go to the community field, which you co-own with a whole load of others in the area, and you're growing wheat, but not that stupid wheat that you see in all the plants look the same and it's a bit boring. They're all different heights and sizes and colours, and it's all pretty beautiful. And there's apple trees dispersed between all of your plants, which is pretty cool. You don't know if it's ready to harvest or anything, so you send up the community drone, and that goes out and has a look. It's not quite, but you can collect some soil samples, and that's used for subsequent years. And actually, you can go and check the apples anyway, because horticulture is booming in the UK, because we've now taxed imports really hard. You then have a very quick drink with everyone from the field, but not everyone could be there. But it's actually not so bad, because they can project in using their VR avatar now, and then have chats anyway. And then finally, before the day's up, the local farmer, Ava, comes in. She's been giving talks in the area to all the kids in the schools, and she's in really high demand. And this is a really important thing. She's in high demand because farming is seen as a desirable career now, along those with engineers and doctors and everything else that is deemed desirable now. So basically, that's what the future could look like. I don't know whether it's what you want it to look like, but my question to you is, what would you like it to look like? And also, how are we going to shape it? Because every time you put food in your mouth or you buy it, you make an ecological and a political statement. So we all have the ability to change stuff, and we just got to think how we want to do it. Thank you.